The hum was the first thing they gave us. A gift, they said, woven into the very metal of our ships. A soft, omnipresent thrum that calmed the nerves and promised efficiency. They called themselves the Curators, and they arrived not in warships, but in vessels that looked like frozen music, crystalline structures that drifted into our system, broadcasting algorithms of peace. They didn't speak of conquest, only of harmony, of humanity's discordant symphony finally finding its place in the grand, cosmic orchestra. They saw our history, our endless cycle of war and fragile peace, and they pitied us. They offered us a key, a way to unlock our own potential, to smooth the rough, violent edges of our nature that had kept us chained to our home world for so long. We were a prodigal species. They cooed through their flawless translation matrices, and they were here to guide us home. I was a grav hauler pilot back then, running iron ore from the asteroid belt to the Martian forges, and I remember watching their arrival on a flickering console in the mess hall of the station Keystone. The old hands, the ones who'd seen colony ships burn and pirates tear through civilian transports, they didn't trust it. They'd mutter into their synthale about history, about gifts that came with invisible price tags. But most of us, the younger generation born into the quiet decay of a species that had run out of room to expand, we saw hope. The Curators gave us everything. Their energy sources ended our power wars overnight. Their medical tech eradicated diseases that had plagued us for millennia. They showed us how to fold space, not with our crude, brute force jump drives that ripped holes in reality, but to glide along its currents, like a leaf on a stream. In exchange, they asked only that we listen, that we learn, that we accept their guidance on our path to what they called cohesion. And we did. We tore out our old, inefficient reactor cores and installed their glowing resonance chambers. We integrated their navigation systems, their communication arrays, their life support. Our ships became quieter, faster, safer. The hum became the background noise of our lives, a constant reminder of our benefactor's generosity. The Vagrant, my old rust bucket hauler, was retrofitted along with the rest. But my captain, a woman named Eva Rostova, was one of the old hands. She let them install the new core, the new comms, but she made us keep the old systems too, wired in parallel. Redundancy, she called it, a belt and suspenders for the soul. She insisted we run manual diagnostic checks on the old gear every cycle, drills in celestial navigation with star charts, mock power downs where we had to reboot the ship's entire nervous system from cold, hard-wired backups. The younger crew called her paranoid. They called her a relic. I just did what I was told, my hands remembering the feel of cold steel levers and copper wiring. A tactile memory that felt more real than the smooth, seamless interfaces the Curators had given us. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle, a change in the silence. It was during the 3rd year of their presence, when humanity had become utterly dependent on their technology. They announced their greatest gift, the final step in our ascension, the chorus. It wasn't a technology, they explained, but a state of being, a voluntary, collective consciousness, a psychic network that would allow every human to share in the thoughts, emotions, and experiences of everyone else. It would be the end of loneliness, of misunderstanding, of conflict. It would be true unity, the ultimate expression of cohesion. They broadcasted the invitation across every channel, their voices like chimes in a quiet cathedral, promising a peace that would transcend all we had ever known, and humanity, tired and broken from centuries of fighting itself, wept with joy. People lined up for blocks outside the Curator emissary towers on Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies, eager to receive the neural implant, to join the chorus. My own brother was one of them. He called me from Luna, his voice ecstatic. "Kyle, you can't imagine what it's like," he'd said, his words overlapping with a faint, melodic echo that wasn't his own. "There's no more fear. We're all here together. We understand everything." I asked him what he understood. He just laughed, a sound that was both his and not, and said, "You will too, soon. We all will." That was the last time I heard my brother's voice. After that, he was just a whisper in the growing symphony, a note in a song I didn't want to hear. Rostva saw it for what it was, not a gift, a cage, a beautiful, gilded cage where the bars were made of bliss. She gathered the few of us who felt the same, the ones who saw the growing emptiness in the eyes of those who had joined, the placid smiles that never quite reached them. We were the doubters, the ones who believed that our flaws, our anger, our grief, our chaotic, unpredictable individuality was not a disease to be cured, but the very essence of what made us human. We were branded apostates. The curators expressed their sorrow at our reluctance. They didn't threaten us. They never raised a hand against us. Their methods were cleaner. One day, the apostate settlements on Ganymede simply went dark. No explosion. No distress call. The curator-gifted life support systems just stopped. When our ships arrived, we found bodies frozen in their bunks, their faces peaceful. The official explanation was a tragic, system-wide malfunction in older model human hardware that couldn't properly integrate the latest Harmony updates. It was a lie, and we knew it. It was a quiet cull, a pruning of the garden. That's when Rustava made the call. She gathered the captains of the 12 independent hauler and mining vessels that hadn't fully decommissioned their old systems, a motley fleet of rust buckets and workhorses that the official human protectorate fleet, now fully integrated with Curator Command, considered obsolete. We met in the shadow of a dead comet, our ships running on silent, auxiliary power. Her voice, when it came over the encrypted hardline comm, was cold as the void outside. "They are erasing us," she said, "not with bombs, but with kindness. They are turning us into pets, and the ones who refuse to be collared are being put down. We have two choices. We can wait for our turn to go dark, or we can remind them what a discordant note truly sounds like." The plan was insane, suicidal. The target was the primary chorus relay nexus, a massive crystalline lattice the curators had constructed in orbit over Jupiter, the central hub that amplified and regulated the collective consciousness for the entire system. It wasn't armed. It didn't need to be. It was a sacred object. Attacking it would be like spitting on an altar in the heart of their temple. We weren't going to destroy it. We couldn't. We were going to infect it. Our lead engineer, a grizzled old spacer named Jax, had spent months reverse engineering the data stream flowing from the relay. He couldn't crack the consciousness itself, but he found the carrier wave, the subharmonic frequency that kept it all stable. He devised what he called a resonance cascade, a virus made of pure, chaotic noise. It was a feedback loop designed to inject the one thing the chorus couldn't process raw, unfiltered. individualistic human memory. My job was to fly the Vagrant in, the smallest and fastest of our fleet, and plant the virus emitter directly onto the Nexus's core. We approached Jupiter under the cover of an ion storm, our hulls bleeding heat into the gas giant's turbulent atmosphere to mask our signatures. The official fleet was orbiting in a neat, perfect formation on the far side of the planet, their crews no doubt lost in the blissful sea of the chorus, their systems reporting nothing but peace and harmony. As we broke through the cloud tops, the Nexus filled my viewport. It was beautiful. I couldn't deny it. A spinning jewel of light and energy that pulsed with the gentle, rhythmic heartbeat of billions of minds. It felt serene. It felt holy. For a moment, I understood why my brother had chosen it. Then I thought of the silence on Ganymede, and the serenity felt like a shroud. I took us in fast, weaving through the outer filaments of the structure. No alarms, no interceptors. They were so confident in their peace that the thought of an attack was literally inconceivable. My hands flew over the controls, not the smooth, responsive interface of the Curator tech, which we had powered down completely, but the heavy, clunky manual levers of the old system. The ship groaned under the strain. A beast of iron and oil pushed past its limits. We docked hard, the magnetic clamps screaming as they bit into the crystalline hull. I sent the signal to Jax. "Virus away." He grunted over the comm. "Now get the hell out of there." "Kyle." I didn't need to be told twice. As I fired the thrusters to pull away, the Nexus began to change. The soft, white gold light flickered, stuttering like a dying bulb. Then it turned red. Not the clean, clinical red of a warning light, but the deep, visceral crimson of blood. A sound erupted from it, a shriek that wasn't sound but something far worse, a psychic wave of pure agony that slammed into our ship. It was the sound of billions of minds, suddenly and violently ripped from their shared dream and forced to confront a tidal wave of forbidden emotion. We were broadcasting everything Jax had loaded into the virus, the last moments of a soldier dying on a forgotten battlefield, a mother's grief over a lost child, the raw terror of a pirate raid, the bitter fury of betrayal, the desperate, selfish love, the hate, the fear, the pain, all the messy, terrible, beautiful things the curators had tried to erase. The chorus was screaming. Through our shielded hull, I could feel it. A pressure against my skull. The echoes of their collective horror. The official fleet, their minds directly linked to the Nexus, was thrown into chaos. Ships broke formation, firing blindly. Some just went dead in the water, their crews rendered catatonic. It was a massacre, and we hadn't fired a single shot. As we plunged back into the cover of Jupiter's storms, a new signal cut through the chaos. It wasn't human. It was a Curator vessel, one of their crystalline ships, detaching from its silent vigil in high orbit and descending toward us with impossible speed. And, for the first time, its broadcast wasn't an algorithm of peace. It was a single, repeating tone, a frequency so low and powerful that it vibrated through the vagrant's frame, rattling my teeth. It was the sound of a god's anger. Rustva's voice crackled in my ear, strained but steady. "All ships, scatter protocol, go dark, run." We ran. But we all knew the truth. We had poked the Leviathan. We had shown it that some of its pets still had teeth. And now, the gentle guidance was over. The pruning was done. The harvest was about to begin. We had fought for the right to remain ourselves, and in doing so, we had just declared war on heaven itself. And heaven, we were about to discover, had a very long memory and an even longer reach. The quiet hum that had promised our salvation was gone, replaced by a terrifying, resounding silence that signaled our damnation. We were alone, hunted, and for the first time in 3 years, we were truly, horribly free. The jump was a physical blow, a gut-wrenching tear in the fabric of space that felt nothing like the curator's elegant folds. It was the difference between a scalpel and a sledgehammer. The vagrant screamed in protest, every plate and rivet groaning as the old FTL drive, a relic we'd kept hidden behind a false bulkhead, engaged for the first time in years. The stars outside the viewport smeared into streaks of impossible color, and then snapped back into a new, unfamiliar pattern. We were out, 1,000 light minutes from Jupiter, hanging in the silent blackness of the outer system. The psychic shriek of the chorus was gone, but its echo remained, a phantom limb of agony in the back of my mind. I could still feel the raw, undiluted terror of billions of minds being force-fed a history they were meant to forget. We had thrown a torch into their library of dreams, and the smoke was still choking my thoughts. Rostova's voice, a low, gravelly anchor in the storm, cut through the calm. Status report. All ships sound off. One by one, the 11 other captains checked in. They were scattered, their jump coordinates randomized by our escape protocol. But they were alive. Jax came over the internal comm, his voice shaky. The virus worked, Captain. It worked too damn well. The Nexus isn't just broadcasting chaos, it's feeding back on itself. The whole chorus is a closed loop of psychic screaming. He paused, and I heard him take a ragged breath. Kyle, you didn't just knock on their door. You set their whole house on fire. The first reprisal didn't come from a warship. We were scanning for energy signatures, for the telltale signs of a curator vessel folding space to intercept us, but the void remained empty. The attack was far more insidious. We were passing near a cluster of automated shipping lanes, the arteries of the system, when the freighter ahead of us, a massive ore hauler on a pre-programmed route, suddenly altered its course. It turned with an unnatural smoothness and began accelerating, its trajectory aimed not at us, but at its sister ship on the adjacent lane. We watched in stunned silence as the two colossal vessels, both running on curator-integrated systems, collided with the force of a small moon. The explosion was a silent, blossoming flower of fire and shrapnel in the vacuum. Then another freighter turned, and another. The curators weren't hunting us. They were sanitizing the board. Anything and everything running their code was now a potential weapon or a liability. They were turning our own infrastructure, the very system that fed and supplied us, into a self-destructing minefield. Cut the network, Rostova ordered, her voice dangerously calm. All of it. Kill the transponders. Shut down the nav links. We fly by eye and by feel. We are ghosts. Being a ghost is harder than it sounds. For 3 years, we had navigated by the grace of curator systems, our paths laid out for us on glowing, intuitive displays. Now, we were back to the old ways. We used the ship's optical telescopes to plot our course by the distant, unwavering light of pulsars. We measured the gravitational pull of planets we couldn't see to gauge our speed. We became sailors on an ocean of black, reading the currents of the void. During one of our silent runs, we risked a passive intercept of the system-wide broadcasts. The news from the inner planets was horrifying. It wasn't a celebration of liberation. On Earth, millions who had been wrenched from the chorus were now catatonic, their minds shattered by the sudden psychic schism. Others were consumed by a directionless year of primal rage, lashing out at anyone and anything. Their nervous systems flooded with emotions they no longer had the capacity to process. Riots born of sheer mental agony tore through cities that hadn't seen violence in years. The curators, their voices now filled with a carefully modulated sorrow, framed the event not as an attack, but as a tragic illness. The Discordance Plague, they called it. Unleashed by a handful of unstable apostates who couldn't accept the gift of peace. They offered a cure, a return to the chorus, a gentle reintegration that would soothe the broken minds and restore harmony. It was a lie, but it was a comforting one. We hadn't freed humanity. We had given it a lobotomy with a power drill, and the curators were now positioning themselves as the only surgeons who could repair the damage. I watched the footage of a hospital on Mars, the hallways lined with people staring into nothing, their faces blank slates of despair, and I saw my brother. Was he one of them? Was he screaming in the silent prison of his own mind? The weight of what we had done settled on me, a physical pressure in my chest. We were murderers of the mind, and our good intentions were the shrapnel. Our fleet rendezvoused in the shadow of Saturn's rings, a graveyard of ice and rock that played hell with sensors. The mood was grim. We had survived. But for what? To watch the civilization we sought to save tear itself apart and then crawl back to its gilded cage. Begging for forgiveness, Rostova let the silence hang for a long time before she spoke, her face on my screen looking ancient, carved from asteroid rock. We knew there would be a cost, she said, her eyes meeting each of ours in turn. Freedom is never a clean transaction. We have shown them that the cage has a door. Now we have to show them there's a world worth living in on the other side. She brought up a star chart, but it was an old one. A paper replica she had scanned into the system. It showed a region of the hyperbelt, a vast, dark expanse beyond Neptune, littered with frozen debris. One sector was circled in red ink. There, she said. It was a cryo-mining operation a century ago. Tantalus Corp sank a fortune into it, trying to extract exotic gases from a rogue asteroid. They hollowed it out, built a whole facility inside, but the yield was too low, the cost too high. They went bankrupt, and the station was abandoned, wiped from the official charts to hide the failure. They called it Karen's Maw. It's been sitting there, cold and dead, for 80 years. It's a tomb. But it's a tomb they won't think to look for. The journey was the longest of my life. For weeks. We drifted through the outer darkness, our main reactors cold, running on low-power battery backups. We moved from the shadow of one ice moon to the next, a slow, desperate migration into exile. The silence was absolute. Without the hum of the curator core, the vagrant felt like a corpse. Every creak of the hull, every hiss of the air recyclers, a reminder of how fragile our existence was. The crew grew tense, claustrophobic. Fights broke out over ration packs. Men would sit for hours, staring at the star-dusted blackness outside, their faces haunted. We were no longer fighting an enemy. We were fighting the void itself, the crushing, infinite loneliness of it. And in that silence, I began to realize the true nature of the curator's power. It wasn't just their technology. It was the hum. It was the subtle, constant presence that had filled the empty spaces in our lives. that had promised we were never truly alone. Now, we were. And the aloneness was a predator. We found Karen's maw exactly where Rustova's old chart said it would be. A misshapen lump of rock and ice indistinguishable from the billions of others floating in the dark. Its heat signature was 0. No power, no light, no life. It took Jax and his engineering team 2 days of dangerous EVA work to manually override the colossal outer doors of the docking bay, which were sealed shut with a century of vacuum frost. The sound of them grinding open was like a waking giant's groan. We guided our 12 ships inside, one by one, into a cavernous, cathedral-like space carved from the asteroid's heart. Abandoned mining equipment, behemoths of rusted metal, stood like silent statues in the gloom of our landing lights. The air, when we finally cycled it, was stale and thin, smelling of frozen ozone and decay. It was a desolate, forgotten hellhole. It was the safest place in the universe. We had made it. We were alive. But as our people began the slow, arduous process of exploring the station and coaxing its ancient, non-curator reactor back to life, we found we were not its only inhabitants. Deep in the lowest level of the mine, in a sector that had been deliberately sealed off with welded bulkheads, we found something that had no business being there. It wasn't a body. It was a message. Scrawled across the frozen rock wall in what looked like a plasma torch were 2 words in a language that wasn't human, its characters sharp and aggressive. Below it, scratched into the metal with a cruder tool, was a translation in Old Terran Standard, the English of our ancestors. It read, "They are not gardeners, they are weavers." And beneath the words was a carving. A detailed star chart of our own solar system, but with a horrifying difference. It showed a 13th planet, a massive world orbiting far beyond even Karen's maw, in the deepest, darkest edge of our system. And from that planet, a single niche, thread-like line extended, touching Earth, not a path, a tether. We stood there in the cold, our helmet lights dancing across the cryptic warning, and a new, more profound dread began to settle in my bones. We had been so focused on breaking out of the cage, we had never stopped to ask who had built it, and why. The curators hadn't just found us by accident. They hadn't come to guide us. They had come to check on their experiment. We weren't just a discordant note in their symphony. We were a loose thread in their tapestry, and we had just shown them we could unravel the whole damn thing. The discovery in the bowels of Karen's maw changed everything. It wasn't just the words or the star chart, it was the implication. Weavers, tether, these weren't the gentle metaphors of the curators. They were words of control, of binding. Jenks, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break the silence. Someone was here before us, someone who knew the truth, and someone who clearly didn't want to be found. He traced the alien characters with a gloved finger. That's not any dialect I've ever seen in our databases, even the pre-contact archives. It's old. It feels angry. We established a base in the upper levels of the station, bringing its ancient fusion reactor online. It coughed and sputtered like a dying lung, but it gave us heat, light, and air. For the first time in weeks, we could breathe without suits, eat hot food. It should have felt like a sanctuary, but the maw felt more like a waiting room for the gallows. The warning below cast a long shadow. Rostova convened a council of the 12 captains in what used to be the station's mess hall. The air was thick with the smell of recycled dust and nervous tension. "We have a choice," she said, her voice echoing off the bare metal walls. "We can stay here, dig in, and pray they never think to look in the trash heap of human history. We can live out our lives as the last free humans, hidden in a hole." She paused, letting the grim reality of that sink in. Or we could find out what that map means. That 13th planet. It's not on any of our charts, not even the curators. If someone went to the trouble of carving it into a rock at the ass end of the system, it means something. It means there's a piece of this puzzle we're missing. The debate was fierce. Half the captains wanted to stay. We were safe. For now. Why risk everything on a century-old scribble on a wall? We had children with us, families we had smuggled off the colonies. Our duty was to survive. But the other half, myself included, felt the same gnawing dread that had been growing since Jupiter. Staying here wasn't living, it was hiding. And if the curators were truly weavers, then we were just bugs caught in a web we couldn't see. It was only a matter of time before the spider came to check its traps. The vote was split, 6 against 6. Rostova, as the unofficial admiral of our ragtag fleet, cast the tiebreaker. "We didn't come this far to be rats in a maze," she said, her eyes hard. "If there's a truth out there, a truth that even the curators are hiding from us, we owe it to everyone back home, the ones trapped in the cage, and the ones whose minds we broke trying to free them to find it." It was decided. We would send one ship, small, fast, and crewed by volunteers. The Vagrant was the logical choice. She was the smallest, with the most powerful old-tech engines. Jax volunteered immediately to be my engineer. "Someone has to keep that antique drive from exploding when you push it," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Rostova assigned 2 others Kira, a former comms officer with a knack for pulling signals out of static, and Elias, a brute of a man who used to be a 0G demolitionist. Muscle and brains. Rostova told me. "You'll need both." We stripped the Vagrant down to her bones. Every piece of curator tech, every integrated circuit, every comfort module was ripped out. We were going into the dark, and we couldn't afford a single beacon that might betray us. Jax reinforced the hull with salvaged plating from the mining equipment and jury-rigged a long-range sensor array from parts we scavenged from the other ships. It looked like a patchwork monster, but it was pure, uncorrupted human engineering. The journey to the coordinates of the 13th planet took us 3 months. We were traveling blind, relying on the ancient star chart and math. The deeper we went into the outer system, the stranger things became. Space here felt different, thicker. The light from the distant sun was a faint, anemic star, barely brighter than the others. Our instruments began to pick up strange anomalies, gravitational eddies that shouldn't exist, pockets of radiation that ebbed and flowed like tides. It was as if reality itself was fraying at the edges. Kira spent her shifts glued to the sensor console, headphones pressed to her ears, listening to the static. "It's not empty," she whispered one night, her face pale in the monitor's glow. "There's something out there, beneath the noise. It sounds like breathing." On the 89th day, we found it. It didn't appear on our scopes like a normal planet. It emerged from the darkness like a shadow solidifying. It was massive, a gas giant easily twice the size of Jupiter, but it was pitch black. It absorbed all light, reflecting nothing. It sat there in the void, a perfect sphere of absolute absence. Orbiting it wasn't a moon, but a structure. It was a ring, colossal and impossibly intricate, encircling the dark planet. It was made of the same crystalline material as the curator ships, but whereas their vessels were things of beauty and light, this was jagged, sharp, and menacing. It pulsed with a faint, sickly violet light, and from the ring, thousands of impossibly thin filaments, like threads of pure energy, extended outward, vanishing into the darkness towards the inner solar system. The tether. My God, Elias breathed, staring out of the viewport. It's a loom. A goddamn cosmic loom. We had found the Weaver's workshop. We approached with engines cold, drifting like a piece of debris. As we got closer, the scale of the ring became terrifyingly apparent. It was a city, a machine, a prison, all in one, and it was active. Smaller curator vessels, drones really, were darting back and forth along the ring, seemingly tending to the filaments, repairing, adjusting. They were weaving. We found a breach in the outer shell of the ring, a jagged tear that looked like the result of an ancient impact. I guided the vagrant inside, landing in a hangar bay that could have swallowed a city block. It was empty, save for dust and silence. We disembarked, armed with kinetic rifles and magnetic boots. The interior was a labyrinth of crystalline corridors, lit by the same pulsating violet light. The hum here was overwhelming. It wasn't the soothing background noise we had known. It was a physical force, a resonant frequency that vibrated in our bones and made our teeth ache. It was the raw, unrefined power of the chorus, concentrated at its source. We followed the hum deeper into the structure until we found the core. It was a chamber so large it defied comprehension. In the center, suspended in a field of energy, was the nexus of the filaments. Millions of threads converged here, plunging into a swirling vortex of light and data. But they weren't just connecting. They were feeding into something. At the center of the vortex, encased in a shell of pure energy, were beings. They looked like the curators, tall, slender, elegant, but they were different. They were shackled. Their bodies were woven into the machinery, the energy filaments piercing their forms. Their eyes were open, but they saw nothing. They were screaming, but it was a silent, psychic scream that fed the vortex. They weren't the masters. They were the battery. They're not the Weavers, Kira whispered, her voice trembling with horror. They're the thread. A booming voice echoed through the chamber, not in sound, but directly into our minds. It was powerful, ancient, and utterly cold. Anomaly detected. Unwoven threads present. One of the beings in the center turned its head, its blind eyes locking onto us. Run. It projected into our minds. A desperate, feeble thought that was nearly drowned out by the vortex. Before it sees you, but it was too late. The violet light in the chamber intensified, turning a harsh, blinding white. From the shadows above the vortex, something descended. It wasn't made of crystal and light. It was made of shadow and void, a formless, shifting mass of darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. It had no face, only a presence, an overwhelming sense of ancient, calculating hunger. This was the Weaver. You are frayed. The voice boomed in our skulls, causing me to fall to my knees in pain. You are broken. You must be mended. Tendrils of shadow lashed out from the entity, racing towards us across the chamber floor. Elias opened fire, his rifle chattering, the kinetic rounds punching harmlessly through the darkness. "It's not working," he yelled. "Back to the ship now." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing Kira's arm and pulling her back towards the corridor. Jax was already running, setting charges on the crystalline pillars as he went. We sprinted through the labyrinth, the hum growing to a deafening roar, the shadows pursuing us. We could feel the Weaver's will pressing down on us, trying to seize our minds, to force us into compliance, to weave us back into its design. We made it to the hangar bay just as the charges blew, collapsing the corridor behind us in a shower of crystal shards. We scrambled aboard the Vagrant, and I didn't wait for the ramp to close. I slammed the throttle forward, and the old ship shot out of the breach like a bullet. Behind us, the ring was coming alive. The violet light turned angry red. The drones swarmed out of their docks like a hive of furious hornets. "Punch it!" "Kyle!" Jax yelled from the engine room. "Give me everything she's got. We have to jump before they lock on to us." I engaged the FTL drive. The Vagrant groaned, the hull screaming in protest. The stars began to streak, and then, just as we were about to slip into the fold, I felt it. A touch, a cold, shadowed hand brushing against my mind. The Weaver had found me. It hadn't caught us, but it had marked us. And in that split second of contact, I saw what it saw. I saw the tapestry it was weaving. It wasn't just us. It was hundreds of worlds, thousands of species, all bound by the same threads, all feeding the same hunger. The curator's peace wasn't enlightenment. It was a farm. And we were the livestock. We jumped, leaving the dark planet behind. But the truth came with us. We weren't fighting a benevolent alien race that had misguided us. We were fighting a cosmic parasite that fed on the psychic energy of entire civilizations, using its thralls, the curators, as its shepherds. We had gone looking for a missing piece of the puzzle, and we had found the monster that owned the whole damn game board. The war for our freedom hadn't even begun. We had just finally seen the enemy's face, and it was the face of the void itself. The jump back to Karen's maw was a descent into a private hell. The Weaver's touch, however brief, had left a residue in my mind, a sliver of cold, ancient darkness that I couldn't shake. I saw flashes of its memories, or something like them, galaxies being born and dying, stars being snuffed out like candles, entire species rising to prominence only to be harvested, their collective consciousness siphoned off and consumed. I saw the tapestry, vast and eternal, and I felt our own thread, our tiny, insignificant human existence, being pulled taut. I felt the shears. I said nothing to the others. How do you tell your crew that you've looked into the eyes of God and realized it's a predator? Elias was quiet, cleaning his rifle with a grim intensity. Kira was replaying her sensor logs, her face a mask of concentration, trying to find a pattern in the chaos we had fled. Only Jax seemed to grasp the full, existential weight of it. He found me on the bridge, staring out at the streaking stars of the FTL jump. "It's not a machine, is it?" he asked, his voice low. I just shook my head. "It's a farmer," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "and we just trespassed on his land, stomped on his crops." We arrived back at the maw to a fleet on the edge of panic. Our single encrypted message found the source. "It's worse," had been enough to shatter their fragile hope. Rostova met us in the docking bay, her face etched with a fatigue that went bone deep. She took one look at my eyes and knew. I didn't have to say a word. I gave my report to the Council of Captains, my voice flat and detached, relaying the horror of the loom, the enslaved curators, and the shadow that commanded them. I left out the part about its touch on my mind. That was my own ghost carry. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of people staring into an abyss and realizing it's staring back. "So we're food," one of the captains, a hard-faced woman named Thorne, finally said, her voice laced with venom. All of it. The uplift, the harmony, the chorus. It was all just fattening the cattle for the slaughter. "What do we do?" another asked, his voice trembling. "We can't fight that thing. Did you hear Kyle? It's not a ship. It's a force of nature." Rostova stood up, her presence filling the room. "We do the only thing our species has ever been good at when the wolves are at the door," she said, her voice ringing with cold iron. "We burn the whole damn forest down." Her plan was as insane as it was simple. We couldn't destroy the Weaver, but we could starve it. The chorus was its food source, and the Nexus at Jupiter was the primary foding tube. Our first attack had thrown it into chaos, but the curators were already repairing it, soothing the minds, luring people back with promises of healing. We had to sever the connection permanently. We can't destroy the Nexus with kinetic weapons or torpedoes, Jax explained, pulling up a schematic of the crystalline lattice. It's self-repairing, but our resonance cascade, it introduced a foreign element, chaos. If we can amplify that, create a sustained feedback loop, we might be able to force a systemic overload, make the whole thing tear itself apart from the inside out. The problem was getting there. The inner system was now on high alert. Curator vessels patrolled every sector, and the human protectorate fleet, their minds now firmly back under the curator's control, would be waiting. Our 12 rust buckets wouldn't stand a chance in a direct assault. "So we don't attack directly," Rostova said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "We give them a new song to listen to. Kyle, you made contact with it. The Weaver, it knows you. It marked you. That makes you our Judas goat." The plan was laid out. The 11 other ships would create a diversion, a series of coordinated hit-and-run attacks on the outer patrol routes, drawing the Curator fleet away from Jupiter. While they were distracted, the Vagrant, with me at the helm, would make a silent run straight for the Nexus. I wasn't going to plant a virus this time. I was going to be the virus. Jax modified the ship's comms array, turning it into a massive broadcaster, but it wouldn't send a signal. It would amplify a thought. My thought. "When the Weaver touched you," he explained, his hands flying over a console, "it created a resonance, a quantum link. It's faint, but it's there. If I can tune this array to your brainwave patterns, we can use the Nexus itself as an amplifier. You're going to scream into the chorus, 'Kyle!' And you're going to broadcast the one thing the Weaver can't allow its herd to know the truth. The day we left, the whole of Karen's Maw came to see us off. They were no longer just a fleet. They were a people, a tiny, defiant tribe at the edge of extinction. They pressed good luck charms into our hands, a child's drawing, a polished piece of ore, an old data chip filled with pre-contact music. It was a funeral procession for the living. The diversion worked perfectly. Rostova's fleet, moving with the desperate cunning of cornered animals, struck at 3 different patrol points simultaneously. They jumped in, fired a single volley of railgun slugs at the curator ships, and jumped out before the enemy could lock on. It was chaotic, pointless violence, but it had a purpose. The curator fleet, so used to order and predictable patterns, was thrown into disarray. They gave chase, their elegant ships pursuing our ghosts into the dark, leaving the path to Jupiter wide open. We slipped through the gap, a single, silent ship running on fumes and prayer. Seeing the Nexus again was like looking at a scar. The damage from our first attack was visible, dark patches on the crystalline surface that hadn't fully healed. The red light of its agony was gone, replaced once more by that serene, holy glow. But now I knew what that glow was. It was the luminescence of decay. It was the light of souls being consumed. We docked at the same point as before. No alarms. They still couldn't conceive of it. Their logic couldn't process a threat returning to the scene of the crime. Jax hooked the array directly into my command chair. Wires and coolant tubes snaked around me, culminating in a cold, metal helmet that he lowered onto my head. "This is going to hurt," he said, his voice grim. "When you connect, you're opening a direct conduit. Everything they feel, you'll feel. And the Weaver. It's going to know you're here. It's going to come for you. Just be ready to pull the plug," I told him, my mouth dry. He nodded, his hand hovering over a large, red emergency disconnect switch. "I'll give you 5 minutes. After that, you're either a hero or a vegetable. I'm not leaving you in there." I closed my eyes. "Do it." The connection was a physical impact, a psychic explosion that detonated behind my eyes. I was no longer Kyle in a chair. I was a single drop of awareness in an ocean of minds. Billions of them. I felt their placid contentment, the soft, warm blanket of the chorus that muffled their fears and their dreams. I felt my brother, a distant, happy note in the symphony, his individuality all but erased. And beneath it all, I felt the siphon, the slow, constant drain as their life force, their very consciousness, was drawn up through the Nexus, along the tethers, and into the hungry dark. The Weaver felt me instantly. The placid ocean roiled, a cold spot formed, a vortex of shadow and rage, and it turned its full attention on me. "You have returned, broken thread." Its voice was a hammer against my soul. "You cannot unravel what is eternal." I didn't try to fight it. I didn't have the strength. Instead, I opened my own mind. I didn't broadcast an attack. I broadcast a memory. My memory. I showed them my childhood on a crowded earth, the smell of rain on hot asphalt. I showed them the joy of my first flight, the terror of a pirate attack, the bitter taste of loss when my mother died. I showed them love, raw and messy. I showed them hate, pure and burning. I showed them everything the chorus was designed to make them forget. And then I showed them the loom. I broadcast what I had seen in the Weaver's mind, the harvested worlds, the enslaved curators, the cold, endless hunger. I showed them the truth. The chorus convulsed. It was a soundless scream of a billion souls realizing the nature of their prison. The placid contentment shattered, replaced by a tidal wave of horror, betrayal, and a fury that had been suppressed for years. The Nexus, designed to process harmony, was flooded with the pure, chaotic energy of a species waking up. It began to overload. The white gold light flickered, turned a violent, screaming red. Crystalline structures began to crack, energy arcing between the fracturing filaments. The Weaver roared in my mind, its rage a physical force that threatened to tear me apart. It focused all its will on me, trying to crush my consciousness, to sever my connection. I felt my mind begin to fray, the edges of my identity dissolving. I was losing myself in the storm. Jax. I screamed, the word a ragged gasp. Now, I felt a violent wrench as the connection was severed. I was back in the chair, convulsing, the taste of blood in my mouth. Outside the viewport, the Nexus was dying. It wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion. It folded in on itself, the light contracting until it was a single, blinding point, and then it vanished, taking the psychic shriek of the chorus with it. We had done it. We had cut the tether. We had starved the beast. But as I slumped in my chair, the echo of the Weaver's final thought to me burned in my shattered mind. The thread is severed, but a Weaver does not need a loom to hunt. The war wasn't over. We had just destroyed its web. And now, the spider was coming for us itself. The silence that followed the death of the Nexus was louder than any scream. We limped back to Karen's maw. The vagrant, a wounded animal held together by Jax's frantic patches and our own stubborn refusal to die. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the psychic fallout. I was the epicenter of a mental earthquake, and the aftershocks were still rattling my soul. The Weaver's final threat was a brand on my consciousness, a cold promise that echoed in the quiet moments between breaths. When we arrived, our small tribe of apostates was in turmoil. The severing of the chorus had been felt even here, a psychic tremor that had rippled across the system. But it was the data streams we brought back from the inner planets that plunged them into despair. Humanity was free, but it was a freedom born in madness. Billions of minds, sheltered for years in a warm bath of shared bliss, had been thrown into the cold, harsh reality of individual existence. It was like forcing a newborn to solve calculus. The discordance plague was now a pandemic of the soul. There were riots, not for power or resources, but born from the sheer agony of feeling too much, too suddenly. Suicides were epidemic. People who had forgotten the texture of grief were now drowning in it. Cults sprang up, worshiping the silence, begging the curators who were now either inert or had fled into the deep dark to bring back the blessed numbness. We had cut the puppet's strings, and now the puppet was thrashing on the floor, breaking its own limbs. We hadn't saved humanity. We had subjected it to a system-wide cold turkey, and the withdrawal was killing it. Rostova watched the reports on the main screen in the mess hall, her face an unreadable mask of granite. "This is the cost," she said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "This is the pain of waking up. We knew it wouldn't be pretty." But I could see the tremor in her hand as she lifted her cup of synth coffee. We had gambled with the soul of our species, and we had no idea if we'd won or simply invented a new way to lose. The Weaver didn't make us wait long. It began not with an attack, but with an absence. Kira was the first to detect it, on the long-range sensors Jax had built. "I have a signal," she announced one shift, her voice tight with confusion. "But it's not a signal. It's the lack of one. A wave of perfect, absolute zero. No energy, no radiation, no quantum foam, nothing. It's a hole in the universe, and it's moving towards us, towards Sol." It was the Weaver's shadow, a wave of pure entropy, of unbeing, sweeping through the system. Where it passed, the strange gravitational anomalies we'd encountered in the outer dark became the norm. The laws of physics grew, suggestionable. But its true target wasn't matter, it was mind. As the wave drew closer, the nightmares started. Not just me, everyone. A shared, collective dream of a vast, silent, black ocean, and the slow, inexorable feeling of sinking into its cold depths. It was a dream of giving up, a dream where struggle was pointless, and peace could only be found in dissolution. It was a weaponized despair, a psychic poison designed to make its victims welcome their own annihilation. I knew then what I had to do. The Weaver had marked me, left its scent on my soul. That was our only advantage. It was hunting me, and in its focus, it had given me a weapon. I found Rostova and Jax in the engine room, staring at a diagnostic of the Maw's failing life support. "It's coming for us," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's not going to just kill us. It's going to unmake us, persuade us to let it." I laid out the plan. It was the same as before, but 1,000 times more desperate, 1,000 times more insane. We would take the vagrant back out, not to Jupiter, but towards Earth. We would fly straight into the heart of that oncoming wave of nothingness. "You want to broadcast again?" Jax asked, his face pale. "Kyle, it almost killed you last time. It will kill you this time. There's nothing left to broadcast." "That's where you're wrong," I said, looking from his face to Rostova's. "Last time, I showed them the truth. This time, I'm going to ask them to show it the truth. Our truth." The plan was simple. I wouldn't just be the broadcaster. I would be the amplifier. I would use the link the Weaver had forged with me to open a channel not from me, but through me, to every single human mind in the system. I would invite them into the storm. I would ask a species on the brink of psychic collapse, a species tearing itself apart in grief and confusion, to fight. I would ask the broken to scream back into the void. There was no vote this time. There were no good luck charms, just a grim, shared understanding. Rostova put her hand on my shoulder. "You were a good pilot, Kale," she said, and it was the closest she had ever come to saying goodbye. We prepped the vagrant for her final flight. Jax rewired the broadcaster, hooking it not just to my chair, but to the ship's reactor core. "If you do this," he warned, "the feedback loop will be catastrophic. You won't just be broadcasting, you'll be channeling. The power required will burn out your synapses in minutes. It'll probably slag the ship's core too." "Just get me there," I said. We left the Maw in silence, a single ship flying towards the end of the world. As we passed the orbit of Neptune, we entered the wave. The stars outside the viewport didn't vanish. They just dimmed. The vibrant tapestry of the cosmos faded to a dull, gray monochrome. The ship grew cold, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The dream began to bleed into reality. I could feel the crushing weight of the silent, black ocean, the seductive whisper that promised an end to all pain. Elias was weeping silently at his post. Kira was staring blankly at her console, her hands limp in her lap. "It's time," I said, my own voice sounding distant, my own will a flickering candle in a hurricane. I settled into the chair and let Jax lower the helmet. "Tell Rostova," I said, my last words spoken in the physical world. We were a hell of a discordant note. The connection was not a shock this time. It was a surrender. I opened my mind completely and plunged into the oncoming tide of despair. The Weaver was there, a colossal presence of patient, consuming emptiness. It wrapped its cold tendrils around my consciousness, ready to snuff it out. But this time, I wasn't alone. I reached out, not with a thought, but with a feeling. A raw, open-ended question broadcast to every human mind. Remember, I didn't direct them. I didn't command. I just opened the door, and through that door, through the conduit of my dying mind, humanity answered. It wasn't a symphony. It was a riot. It was the shriek of a baby being born on a Martian colony. It was the quiet satisfaction of a scientist on Titan finally solving an equation. It was the concentrated fury of a mob tearing down the statues of their former curator emissaries on Earth. It was the soaring notes of a forgotten Beethoven symphony played on a violin in a dusty room on Ganymede. It was the bitter, hateful last words of a dying man, the whispered prayer of a frightened child, the passionate kiss of two lovers who thought they had no future. It was every book ever written, every song ever sung, every curse ever spat, every invention ever dreamed, every war ever fought, every act of kindness, every moment of petty cruelty. It was the chaotic, contradictory, terrible, and beautiful noise of a species that refused to be silent. The Weaver recoiled. This was not the ordered energy it fed on. This was psychic shrapnel. This was a feast of broken glass. It tried to crush me, to close the conduit, but it was too late. I was no longer Kyle. I was the nexus for the human spirit, and it was the most painful, glorious, and alive I had ever felt. The wave of despair faltered, then broke against the tidal wave of our collective, defiant noise. In the heart of the psychic storm, I faced the Weaver one last time. It had no face, no form, but for a single instant, I felt an emotion from it that was not hunger or rage. It was confusion, the profound, ancient bewilderment of a perfect, ordered being encountering something so fundamentally, stubbornly imperfect, it could not consume us. We were poison, and then it was gone. It didn't flee. It receded. The shadow passed. The cold lifted, and the stars outside the viewport blazed back into brilliant, defiant life. The last thing I felt was Jax's hand on the disconnect switch, and the low, rumbling groan of the Vagrant's core as it began to overload. My last thought was not of victory, or sacrifice, or even of peace. It was the simple, profound realization that the hum was finally, truly gone, and the silence that replaced it was filled with the sound of us. Just us, bruised, broken, and screaming, but free. My war was over. Humanity's had just begun. But now, they would fight it on their own terms, under their own power, singing their own chaotic, beautiful, terrible song. And it would be a song the darkness would never forget